Hey guys, Nathan Graybeal here. Today let's check out 5 jazz standards that are so useful for our development as jazz musicians. Let's analyze these standards together, and let's also check out 5 soloing techniques that can help us play better through standard chord changes. Those 5 techniques are going to be melodic pacing, rhythmic variation, motivic development, contrast, and finally, voice leading. If you want to go deeper into practicing jazz standards with all these concepts, you're welcome to check out my new Etudes ebook with jazz lesson videos, 25 melodic etudes on jazz standards. If you'd like to check out this PDF resource, which includes recordings and backing tracks over every etude, you can find it in the description below and use code NG5 for $5 off. Alright, so the first tune we're going to check out today is All the Things You Are by Jerome Kern. So now we're going to analyze the chord changes and look at various soloing techniques that we mentioned earlier. So the tune starts off with a 6-2-5-1-4 chord progression. And on the 6th measure, we go up a half step and play a 2-5 to the new one, which is 3 major 7 compared to the original key. Then we turn this chord into a minor 7 and we play yet again a 6-2-5-1-4. And just like before, we go up a half step and play a 2-5 into the new one. So these first 16 bars are exactly the same, just transposed up a fifth the second time around. Now we're going to play that same 2-5-1 we just played, but this time the longhand version. After the G major 7, we're going to go down a half step and play the minor 2-5-1. And rather than resolving to the 1 chord of a 1 minor 7, we're actually going to play the 1 major 7, providing some cool harmonic contrast that this tune is famous for. Measure 24 sets us up with a minor 2-5 back into the beginning of the form. And we repeat this chord progression yet again. We play a 6-2-5-1-4, but now something changes. Rather than going up a half step and playing a 2-5, we play this chord again, but this time with a minor third, turning this chord into a D flat minor major 7. And if we take a look at our root movements, we walk down in half steps. So we have a D flat and then C minor 7, and then a B diminished 7, and then a B flat minor 7. And this starts our 2-5-1 chord progression. And just like before, we play this minor 2-5-1 again back into the top of the form. So now let's take a look at all 5 of the soloing techniques being played within this etude. An instance of melodic pacing can be found in the first 8 bars. The first 5 notes is based on a piano voicing based around fifths. You have your root, you go up a fifth, you go up a fifth, and then you go up a half step to the minor third, and then go up a fifth again. Then on beat 4, we anticipate the next chord by highlighting its fifth and flat third. The rest of this measure walks down the B flat minor triad, and we play this shape again on E flat 7, this time transposed and the notes slightly tweaked to fit the notes of an E flat dominant 7. After this, we use a triplet to swiftly navigate us to the end of this phrase. Now, since the chords are largely based around ascending fourth bass movements or descending fifths, up until measure 6, where we go up a half step and play a quick 2-5-1, this is an example of 2 different harmonic pacings happening. When we get to measure 6, because the chord pattern changes, we're going to change the melodic pattern as well. We use totally different rhythms and different notes to support this contrast. And when the C major 7's over and we return back to the same chord progression but modulated up a fifth, we begin our new sentence, if you will, and the same concept applies. As you go through this etude, you can see this concept all over. A good example of rhythmic variation can be found here, starting on measure 29. We start off with a lot of eighth notes, and then we use 16th notes to carry on our melodic line all the way to the top of the register of our instrument. Then using all eighth notes, we fall back down till we land on the C minor 7. We start ascending again, but this time using a triplet to help us, till we land on the B fully diminished. And we use a flurry of rapid 16th notes to walk our way back down the register of our instrument. And the remainder of the song utilizes triplets and eighth notes in various spots. The final phrase uses instances of ties to really seal the deal. An example of motivic development can be found in measure 25. Both of these two measures serve as one statement. So I reinforce the statement on the E flat 7, but slightly change the rhythm at the end. And on the D flat major 7, I do it yet again, but this time it has a pickup note, and we have a set of new 16th notes as a segue to branch into a new development of the melody. An example of contrast can be found in the minor 2-5-1 within measure 21. The last four notes of the F sharp minor 7 uses a Lydian grip, also known as a major 7 flat 5, from the flat fifth of this chord. So this is a C Lydian grip, or C major 7 flat 5. This 4-note cell generates a very popular color within jazz solos. Then the next 5 notes, starting on the B7 flat 9, we walk up the notes of B Phrygian dominant. And then the final 4 notes we use yet another shape. We play an F sharp diminished major 7. This gives us some cool altered extensions, such as the flat 9 and the sharp 11. On the E major 7, we use yet again another shape. We play the shape of 1, 3, 4, 5 in the key of B, but we start on the 9th of this chord and descend our way down it. In the preceding minor 2-5, we have a D flat Lydian grip, this time ascending it, starting on its 7th. And lastly, a good old basic C major triad. All these different shapes provide so much contrast in different colors within just one minor 2-5. The last technique we'll take a look at is voice leading, which can really be found all over this etude. We'll take a look at an instance where it happens in measure 17. On this long 2-5 in G major, you can see that every note transition of the and of 4 to beat 1 of every chord are no more than a whole step. If you can connect two chords' chord tones with a really small interval, that is considered successful voice leading. So the next tune we'll cover is There Will Never Be Another You by Harry Warren. So the harmonic content of this tune starts off with a 1 major 7 for 2 bars. Then our root goes down a half step and we play a minor 2-5-1, this 1 being the 6th of the original key. After 2 bars again, our root moves down a whole step and we play a major 2-5-1, landing us into 4 of the original key. The next chord is a staple of this tune, borrowing from the 4 minor. We play a flat 7 Lydian dominant chord and resolve upwards a whole step back to the 1 major 7. The next chord is the 6 minor 7, bridging us to another staple of this tune, the secondary dominant, the 5 of 2. Then we resolve to 5, but before that 5 we play a 2 here, so we have a 2, 5, 1, and we're back to the top of the form. So everything that just happened pretty much happens again up until we get to the last 5 bars. So after our 1 major 7, we play a minor 2-5 to what would be our 3 chord, but rather than going to the 3 chord, we see the 3 chord as an upper structure of the chord it chooses here, the 1 chord. And now we have a long turnaround. A turnaround is a set of quick chords that get us back to the top of the form. So we have a 1 major 7, a 4 dominant 7, which is also a tritone sub of the 5 of the next chord. So this is 5 of 3. Then our next chord is 3. And you can really see both of these chords as a 2-5 of 2. So after that 5 of 2, we resolve to 2, and we play it yet another 2, 5, and resolve to 1. And for good measure, just to reinforce the sound of tonic, dominant, and back to the tonic of the beginning of the tune. So if we take a look at the etude here, we can find all kinds of instances of melodic pacing. One instance is at measure 5. We have a 2-bar C minor 7 chord, so the melodic content inside highlights the sound of C minor pentatonic till the chord is finally over. When we get to the 2-5 after it, we switch the quarter notes, supporting the change of harmonic content through this modulation. When we resolve to the A flat major 7, we change up the melodic content again with more notes such as eighth notes and triplets. When we resolve to the 1 chord, we finally actually end this phrase, giving us 2 quarter rests in a row. Now we have an incoming secondary dominant, so right before it, we have this flurry of descending eighth notes and 16th notes, and we fill up this entire secondary dominant with eighth notes, and yet again, when the harmonic structure starts to change, by playing these 2-5s, we change the rhythms with it as well. When we get to the 1 chord again, we end the phrase again as well. All of this shows examples of thematic development that correlates with the harmonic changes and modulations going on within the tune. An example of rhythmic development can be found in measure 29. First, we start off with all eighth notes. Then in the next measure, we have all eighth notes again, but we insert an eighth rest. The next measure, we get a little more complicated. We have eighth notes and then a triplet, and then an eighth note and an eighth rest. The next measure is very similar at first, but we add in some variety with the last 2 beats by putting in 2 simple quarter notes. Finally, we get back to the beginning of the form with 2 eighth notes tied to a quarter note. A great example of melodic or motivic development can be found at measure 17. If you take a look at this E flat major 7, you have this figure here. After the rest, we have the figure again, but there's some slight variation in both pitch content and rhythm. And finally, with the third reinforcement, it's the most intense by going to the highest part of the register within this motivic development. And we have a set of rapid 30-second notes that acts as a bridge to carry us out of this theme, but still in relation to everything we just played. On the B flat minor 7, we descend this shape, and on the next chord after it, we play that shape again, utilizing a different set of pitches and a slight rhythmic variation by using the tie and the triplet. A strong example of contrast can be found at measure 25. On the A flat major 7 chord, the first 5 notes really serve as a melodic cell. Then we play it again into the D flat 7 sharp 11, but it's slightly transposed to fit the sound of this D flat Lydian dominant, and we add in this triplet and the eighth notes after it in order to really beef up this reinstatement. So as you can see, setting up with a melodic cell and then setting it up, leaving the player to think that they're going to hear it again just in another key, but you create this element of surprise by changing up the rhythm at an unpredictable time, really creates a cool sort of contrast. And finally, an example of voice leading can be found at measure 29. If you look at these 12 eighth notes as 3 separate 4-note melodic cells, the last 3 notes of each of these cells are exactly the same, minus the very final one's variation. But if you look at the first eighth notes of all these cells, they're all voice leading downwards in half steps. And each of these are hitting key chord tones within their chords. Of course, as a melodic instrument that can only play 1 note at a time, voice leading is one of the most central concepts, so voice leading is found all throughout this etude. So the next tune we'll cover is Stella By Starlight by Victor Young. So this tune, Stella By Starlight, starts off with a minor 2-5 to 3, but rather than resolving to 3, it resolves to the 2-5 of 1. But rather than resolving to the 1, it instead resolves into the 2 of 4. So we play the 2 of 4, the 5 of 4, and finally we resolve to the 4. The next chord is a dominant chord that resolves upwards a half step to the 1 major 7. So because this dominant chord is a flat 7 dominant 7, we're actually going to be using the sound of Lydian dominant rather than your standard fundamental Mixolydian dominant. After this 1 major 7, we again play the minor 2-5 2-3. Then we'll quickly play a backdoor 2-5 2-5. So if you're thinking in the key of 5 now, you're actually playing a 4 minor 7 to 5 to a flat 7 dominant 2-5, and then your 1 of 5, so the 5 major 7. So momentarily we're in a new key. We play this F major 7, and then we play a 2-5 of F major 7. Rather than resolving to the F again, we resolve up a half step, and this becomes a new minor 2-5, being a minor 2-5 to the original key's 6. So we get to the bridge, and we're playing a 6 dominant 7 altered chord for 2 measures, and we'll resolve to that chord's 1 minor 7. The next chord is the flat 7 dominant 7 of the original key. So we play this chord for 2 bars and resolve upwards a whole step, just like earlier in the tune, up to the 1 major 7, this time with a raised fourth, giving us a B flat major 7 sharp 11. Now for the final 8 bars of the tune, the first 2 chords are just like the first 2 chords of the top of the form, a minor 2-5 to 3. This time we actually do resolve to 3, but this third is a pivot chord. Pivot chord meaning a chord that serves 2 functions at the same time. So we resolve to 1, but this is also the 2 of the next chord. So we're playing a minor 2-5 into the next pivot chord. This one, which becomes the next 2 of the next minor 2-5 chord. And finally, we're resolved to the 1 major 7, getting us back to the home chord. So an example of melodic pacing can be found right in the beginning. The first 4 bars are a set of 2 different 2-5s, and so we play one phrase, or you can think of it as a sentence, for that entirety of those 4 measures. You can see the end of the sentence. You can think of that as a period that separates 2 sentences. Then at the end of this F7, we start the next sentence. And for these 8 bars, we have a similar harmonic rhythm where we start off with 2-5s, but rather than playing another 2-5, we just have a different form of getting back to the 1 chord in measure 9. So to accommodate for these slight harmonic differences, we intentionally continued the line a bit longer than before, setting up the melodic pacing to not be as symmetrical, just as the chords aren't as symmetrical. The correlation of matching the melodic content with the timing of the harmonic content can really help with solos sounding more organic. An example of rhythmic variation can be observed in measure 11. We start off with this rhythmic scale, and then after a pickup, we play it again. And after that, we do another pickup and play it again. Now, rather than playing it a 4th time, we change up the rhythm. We use syncopations and triplet 16ths to really navigate us through these harmonic changes. Then all of a sudden in this A half diminished, we don't use any triplet 16ths, but the next chord all of a sudden uses it again, but in a totally different placement that neither of the previous measures had before. After the final 2 16th notes, we land on a half note for a G7 alt. This whole set of phrases that we just observed is also a great example of motivic development. We took this rhythmic and melodic cell, reinforced it a couple times, and then really developed it, using new rhythms and incorporating more register of the horn. A cool example of contrast can be found in the bridge starting at measure 17. On the G7 alt, we use the flat 6 pentatonic based from the flat 6, so we're using E flat, flat 6 pentatonic. This really helps highlight the sound of A flat melodic minor, the parent scale of this chord. Then on our C minor 7, we switch this concept. Rather than thinking of highlighting a specific shape, we're thinking of melodic chromaticism, having chromatic approach tones and enclosures. Then when we get to the A flat 7 sharp 11, we again use the major pentatonic flat 6 sound. This time it's from the 2, so we're using B flat, flat 6 pentatonic. And to really add some cool contrast, we take this pattern where I start on a note, go down 4 notes, go up 1 note, go up 3 notes, then back down 1 note and restart this pattern. When I arrive to the 1 chord, I continue this melodic shape, but it's no longer pentatonic bass. Now we're just using strictly diatonic ornaments around chord tones. All these different colorful shapes right next to each other really provide some cool contrast. An example of voice leading can be found in measure 26. We utilize the shape of 1, 3, 4, 5 in various different modulations. When you look at each fragment, you'll see that they're all very close in pitch, all while hitting key diatonic chord scale pitches. When we make it to that final F7 flat 9, We have a long descending quirky intervallic shape, but right when we connect it on our last note into the B flat major 7, we resolve it with just a small half-step interval. Again, anytime we connect two chords chord tones with a small interval, we're utilizing successful voice leading. The next tune we'll go over is Blues for Alice by Charlie Parker. Compared to the previous tunes we analyzed, Blues for Alice uses more use of rapid chord movements. We start off on our 1 major 7, and if you look at the next 5 bars from here, our roots are moving up in fourths, or down in fifths. So essentially we have a minor 2-5, and then a major 2-5, and then another major 2-5, and we finally resolve on our 4. So right off the bat, it's pretty much 2-5 heaven. After this 4 dominant chord, we switch this to a 4 minor chord. And now it's again 2-5 heaven, but now it's slightly different. Rather than continuous 4th or 5th movements in the bass, our 2-5s are descending down half steps every measure. This continues till we finally land on the original 2 of the home key. And that is when we get a full bar for our 2, and the next chord is a full bar of 5. Finally, we end off with a good old turnaround. Again, a turnaround is a set of rapid chords that functions as a segue back into the top of the form. This turnaround is the most common turnaround, 1, 6, 2, 5. So upon tunes that utilize mostly eighth notes, the melodic pacing is not where you would normally think it to be. A lot of the melodic pacing takes place in the direction of the eighth notes. Upon looking at the whole etude, you can see various times when the eighth notes generally start to descend and the times where it starts to ascend. Some descends or ascends are longer than others, and some are wider than others. Because this tune is shorter and tends to play faster, you can actually split this whole etude to observe melodic pacing. Measures 1 through 9 is very much scalar based, mixed in with many instances of melodic chromaticism. But in measure 10 through the first half of measure 11, we have sort of one defined melody here, and then for the remaining notes of this etude, it's connected to another melody. So if you ever hear lots of eighth notes, it's helpful to observe the timing of when the player generally plays upwards or downwards. An instance of rhythmic variation can be found in measure 10. We have eighth notes, an eighth rest, 2 16th notes, and then 6 eighth notes right after, then an eighth rest, eighth note, and triplet sixteenths, and more eighth notes, a quarter note, eighth notes again, and finally a half note. An instance of motivic development can be found starting on measure 3. Beats 1 through 3 is a pretty common shape within bebop solos, and the last 3 eighth notes is usually a setup into doing it again modulated for the next 2-5 of the next measure. But instead of doing that, we instead ascend upwards, highlighting the flat 5 or sharp 11 of the F7, creating some cool contrast. So this entire phrase is also an instance of contrast. The contrast continues in the next measure where we play a triplet downwards and then ascend back up with eighth notes. And setting up the ear to do it again, we actually choose not to do it again. And we take a different approach with these descending eighth notes of the 2-5s in measure 6. And finally, voice leading can be found all over this piece. If you look at the last note of every measure and then the first note of every measure, there is no interval that's larger than a major third. The only instance is measure 12 back into the beginning of the form. And of course, the final tune we have to go over is Giant Steps by John Coltrane. So the last tune is famously known as a very difficult tune, but when analyzing the harmonies, it's actually pretty simple. It starts off on the flat 6 major 7 of the original key. You can find the original key by seeing the 1 chord in measure 3, which in this case is our E flat major 7. To really simplify these chords, we can really reduce everything to 5 1s or 2 5 1s. So the first chord is a 6 major 7, then we modulate down a major third, playing 5 1. Then we modulate down a major third again, playing 5 1. Then we move up a major third and play 2 5 1. We modulate down a major third and play 5 1. Now this might really shock you, but we modulate down a major third and play 5-1. We modulate up a major third and play 2-5-1. Again, we modulate up a major third and play 2-5-1 again. I'm really going to throw you for a spin here. We modulate up a major third and play 2-5-1. If you really want a curveball, we modulate up a major third and play a 2-5-1. And I bet you didn't see this one coming. We modulate down a major third again and play a 2-5 back into the top of the form. So as you can see here, harmonically, this is actually pretty simple. What makes it hard is constantly modulating major thirds into very distantly related keys, all while happening at a fast tempo. So it does take a quite advanced technical prowess of your horn and improvisational knowledge to really solo on this at a fast tempo. So let's look at those 5 soloing techniques to help us learn how to solo over this tune. So the general melodic pacing in this tune is similar to the one in Blues for Alice that we just analyzed. On most great recordings of great solos that you hear, they're mostly eighth notes and triplets. Most of the eighth notes are 4-note melodic scales that connect everything together. You can separate phrases by observing rests, and because this form is generally pretty short and goes by so quickly, you might see your first rest in the middle of the tune, like in this etude. So as far as the melodic pacing goes, I would separate this entire etude into 2 long sentences. The first one starting before the rest in measure 9, and the second one starting after that rest. An instance of rhythmic variation can be seen in measure 10. After almost entirely eighth notes, we finally have a triplet. In measure 13, we have another instance of a triplet. These triplets also provide some contrast, as the ear is so used to hearing eighth notes all throughout the entire beginning that by the time that we finally hear triplets, the rhythmic change becomes that much more noticeable. An example of melodic development can be seen in measure 8. This is the first measure where we utilize any altered extension. Every measure before it was strictly diatonic to the chords that it belonged to. We develop melodic complexity by altering these extensions of that B flat 7 chord. As we continue on, we see in measure 11, we have our first instance of melodic chromaticism. We play the 5th and then a chromatic approach tone and then the 5th again, and then a chromatic approach tone before the 3rd, and then we play the 3rd. And finally, you can find instances of voice leading between every single chord. If you look at the first note of every chord and one note before those notes, really the main goal in connecting these chords is by voice leading 4 note cells together. Once that starts to feel easy, you can really start to mix up the rhythms, and improvising on this tune starts to feel less and less mystical, but it's still pretty hard. Alright guys, I hope you got a lot out of this video. I certainly had a lot of fun writing these etudes. If you'd like to go deeper into what we discussed today, as well as have access to all 25 etudes and recordings of them, you can find the link to that in the description below. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Please leave a like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.